Welcome back, and at long last, I'm happy to report that we have gotten you through all of those very boring administrative videos, and we can finally get to the really entertaining and enjoyable part of the course, the part that you actually signed up for, and that's ancient Greek and Roman comedy. So thank you very much for your patience in getting through all of those first and second session administrative videos. Really glad for that, and now at long last we can actually get down to what you're actually here for. So what I'd like you to first do, since we're now going to talk about our first author of the course to finally get things on the way, kick things off, our first author, Aristophanes. First thing I'd like you to do is to pause your video and go to Sakai. Please go to Resources, and please locate handout number 1, which is the one on Aristophanes. Please pause your video and locate handout number 1. Okay, do you have handout number 1 open? Okay, excellent. So as you see, that this is the one in Aristophanes, and what we do in this course is to provide, each time we come to a new author, some basic biographical background on the author himself. This is not something that you need specifically for an exam, just so you know, but it is a helpful way for you to get to know who the authors are, so you understand their own background, and then have a summary of the works that they wrote, so that you can understand where in the corpus of their works, the works that you're reading for the course fit. So that's the main purpose of this. So Aristophanes, whose dates approximate are given here, 450 to 385 BC, is the only surviving playwright that we have from what is referred to as Old Comedy. Now our next video is going to describe Old Comedy in more specific detail, so I won't get into it too much here. But Old Comedy is the first form of comedy that we have surviving from ancient Athens. There are in fact 3 forms altogether: Old, Middle, and New. The later author that we're going to read, Menander, is a representative of New Comedy. Aristophanes had quite a bit of competition, in fact, quite a few other playwrights who did write Old Comedy, but as it works out, his are the only plays surviving intact, even though we do have fragments from some of the other playwrights, so we have some idea of other topics and plots that circulated for Old Comedy. But it's this guy whose plays made it, and so his are the plays that we're going to read. So turn now in your handout to the first page, so that we can discuss his bio. And as you can see, it's actually not that hard, because unfortunately we don't have very much bio for Aristophanes. He was, again, his birth date is given approximately as 460 to 450 BC. I'm just saying 450 here just to make it easy, but something in that period. One reason why we can tell that, even though we don't have the date given to us directly, is that you had to be at least age 30 to do anything of importance, like, for instance, serve as general or produce a play in ancient Athens. And we have a reference saying that Aristophanes was too young to produce the first play that we know of his, the one called Banqueters. So therefore, since that is dated by independent evidence as 427 BC, that means that probably he was born sometime after 457 BC, approximately. So therefore, we figure that he was somewhere in the 450s BC. So we'll just say 450 here to make it easy. So he died again approximately 385 BC, because the last play that we have surviving of his, the one called Plutus, is dated to 388 BC, and there's no reference to his knowing any historical events down later than that, and no other evidence of any works coming from him. So we figure somewhere around 385 BC is his date of death. And as far as the playwright himself, we know nothing about him except that he apparently owned property, according to our reference in Clouds, on the island of Aegina. This island on your map is a little bit southeast of Athens, right off the coastline. If you see where Salamis is, that big island in the Gulf of Salamis, and go east of that, then you see, east this way, then you see a small island that's right at the entrance to that gulf, and that's the one called Aegina. Politically, Aegina and the city of Athens did not get along well most of their history, and in fact there was a point when the Athenians actually took over the island in the mid 450s BC under the the auspices of the great politician Pericles, as it turns out. So Aegina didn't fare very well politically as a neighbor of Athens. But in any event, apparently Aristophanes owned property on it, so that would have meant that he would have been pretty wealthy. And as we're going to talk about with old comedy, you had to be a man of means to be able to perform and produce plays. So therefore, he does indeed turn out to have been a fairly wealthy man. Otherwise, though, we just don't know very much about Aristophanes himself. He did have apparently a son named Araros, and he was the son of Philip, and otherwise we can't really say too much about him. But fortunately, we are much better informed about his theatrical production, and that's what we'll now talk about here with his works. So the works are described for you in Roman numeral 2 on your handout, going from page 1 over to page 2. I'll just describe them here briefly, since you can read them pretty easily. The first play we have surviving is called Banqueters. In 427 BC. We don't know too much about it, except that apparently there was a father, son, and some of the youth that was involved in it. 426 BC, though, Babylonians is a play of some note, because that was apparently the first clash Aristophanes had with the infamous Cleon, mentioned here. You notice Rough. We're going to come back to talking about him in a little while. Aristophanes apparently wore a dog mask in order to portray Cleon in this play. Might have also done it again later for Knights. And that got Cleon so outraged that apparently he went after Aristophanes legally and accused him of making attacks on the magistrates, which also might have had a religious aspect to it, since plays were being performed theatrically during a festival of the theater god Dionysus. So Aristophanes formally got his butt kicked legally, and he obviously was really happy that happened to him, because he makes several references to it in later plays, especially Wasps, that he took on Cleon and took a bit of legal injury, one for the team, so to speak, going after Cleon. So that's the thing of note about Babylonians. But otherwise, again, we don't have much about it, except that Dionysus apparently was in the play. So then the first play that actually does survive, Acharnians, 425 BC, was a success. He won first place for it. Again, in old comedy, we'll talk about the prize structure, but the basic thing for you to know right now is first place is wonderful. Second place out of the 3 places that you might get is absolutely deplorable. Forget about third place, which is what he got for Clouds. But he did win with Acharnians, and that one is the one about making peace privately with Sparta. This character Diciopolis does that, therefore effectively acting as a traitor to Athens, but he's able to get away with it. So he and the Spartans come up with a private peace, basically ending the war for themselves, and then he enjoys all sorts of benefits from that. The general Lamachus shows up midway through, and he's trying to fight the war, and Diciopolis is trying to enjoy the peace. So Diciopolis gets all the wine and all the girls, and Lamachus gets hurt in battle. So the very end is the funny contrast between Diciopolis, the peacemaking farmer, and Lamachus, the courageous general, who again gets his butt kicked in war. Okay, so that's Acharnians. Then we have 424 BC Knights, which is the point where Cleon is described as the favorite slave of Deimos, and Deimos is the Greek word for the populace, and that's a very important concept in Athens, because it was the populace that voted on everything in the civic democracy of Athens, and that's also what's going to be described in later videos where we talk about Pericles and the whole development of Athenian government. But the Deimos, in this case, is envisioned as a stupid old man with Cleon as his really favorite fawning slave. And then this sausage seller shows up on the scene, and the two of them end up in a debate. As it turns out, the sausage seller, despite being this rather stupid guy off the street, is able to speak quite rhetorically, and so he is able to outdo the slave Cleon and demonstrate to Deimos that he shouldn't trust him anymore. And so in the end, Cleon gets his own butt kicked. As it turns out, though, although this play won first prize, Knights, the Athenians were not convinced, despite the success of the play, to be on the guard against Cleon. And so they still voted him back into office the following year, even though Aristophanes pleaded with them not to do so. So comedy, only could have a certain reach, as we're going to see later when we do video days with modern satire. All right, Clouds is the first play that we're actually reading in the course, 423 BC. By now you should have read it, in fact, for today. And Clouds is the one, as you read about, the elderly guy Strepsiades trying to find his way to get out of debt, trying to take his son into the school of Socrates to learn how to do argumentation so that he wouldn't have to pay any more debts. And Phidippides first says no, then later on he says yes, and then when he actually learns how to do argumentation, he does actually help his dad to get out of debt, but then he turns his attacks against his dad and is threatening to do so against his mom, and so the end of the play, as you see, is a big conflagration. You might want to check out my YouTube list of Greek comedy. Included in it is the video of that song by Pink Floyd called Another Brick on the Wall. Being able to compare the conflagration of the school of Socrates with the conflagration of the school in that video is pretty neat if you haven't actually seen that. So there's an interesting comparison there. All right, so Clouds didn't do well, as it turns out. It came in third place. The play that we actually have of Clouds, we're going to talk about later when we read it and discuss it, is actually a later revision of the play that Aristophanes planned to put on. He probably wrote it sometime around 418, 417, maybe 416 BC, but he never actually got it on stage. So what we have in front of us isn't what was put on stage originally, and apparently there were a fair number of important changes that were made in the plays from the original version to the revised version. So what was going on in the original version, we're not exactly sure, but whatever it was, it apparently didn't work because this play came in third place. And as we know from the next play, Wasps, Aristophanes was furious at receiving a third place for this great play where he had all these awesome ideas that the audience just paid no attention to. So nobody in the ancient world would ever take a third place lightly, and Aristophanes definitely did not. Okay, so that's Clouds. The next play, which is the next after you do your video day, you're going to come to, and that's Wasps. And Wasps is all about the jury system. I won't discuss it much now since you're going to read it, but the jury system that is in fact corrupt in the city of Athens, and that's at the introduction of first Pericles and then this fine fellow Cleon. This is where we actually get him as Rough. You'll see that when we have a trial between two dogs. The prosecutor dog is called Cleon Hound in your translation, and boy does he rough away. So you'll see that with Wasps, but basically this is describing all of the elderly men of the city of Athens who are all the jurors in the legal system, who all act like wasps, stinging all the defendants, and therefore demonstrating the corruption of the legal system. So that's Wasps, the year after Clouds, 422 BC, and that was a second place winner. Then there was a play Peace in 421 BC, a second place winner. That one was celebrating the temporary termination of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. It started in 431 BC and it went to 421 BC, and then there was a peace period. And this play Peace celebrates the advent of that peace. Then skipping down to 9, we have Birds, which we're reading after the second video day. Birds was produced in 414 BC, about the point when the peace was falling apart between Athens and Sparta, and they were about to get back into war again. And Birds is a very utopian type play describing a fake city constructed in the clouds called Cloud Cuckoo Land by birds and humans working together. And it looks like it's a really wonderful paradise away from all the troubles of the world. But when you analyze even superficially, you realize immediately that it's really nothing more than just the city of Athens just transported to the clouds. And the city ends up acting essentially as a tyrant city, taking sacrifices away from the gods until they eventually agree to make peace and allow this city to become supreme over even Mount Olympus. So it's basically another political type play describing what happens with somebody getting into supreme power. So that's Birds. And then after Birds, we have Lysistrata, the next play we're reading, which is 3 years after Birds. That was produced during a period of very severe governmental upheaval in Athens when there was a coup that temporarily stopped the democracy. There was an oligarchy that took over, a corrupt one, of course, as it turned out. And so during that coup period, Lysistrata mocks it by describing how women get together, they band together, and they take over the city of Athens in order to get the men to stop the war with Sparta. And the men end up so sexually deprived that they're hard up, and they actually do agree to to stop the war. So that's a really hysterically funny play, like Lysistrata. The same year, another play we're not reading, Thesmophoria Zeusai, also has a women's theme to it. It's about the women celebrating the festival, which you'll see in the World of Athens textbook, the Thesmophoria. And these women band together in order to go after Euripides, the tragic playwright, because he constantly makes women look awful. And when they are talking about how they're going to go after Euripides, but Euripides tries to send one of his relatives into the festival disguised as a woman to try to convince them not to go after him. It doesn't work. He gets divested and held prisoner, and Euripides has to come up with all sorts of fantastic schemes to get him out based on his plays. And then the final play of Aristophanes that we're reading, you can skip down, is Frogs. That's number 13 on page 2 of your handout. And Frogs is the real masterpiece where Aristophanes makes a final appeal using the two playwrights, Aeschylus and Euripides, in a contest to try to get the Athenians to change the ways of their policies. And of course, once again, the Athenians all applauded and give it first place, but then they don't listen to a thing he says. And that, sadly, was the last play that Aristophanes got to produce during the war, because the following year, after 405 BC, the following year, 404 BC, is where the Athenians actually did finally lose the war with Sparta, and they lost big. It was a very severe defeat. So this play, ironically, is the funniest play that Aristophanes wrote in one of the darkest periods of Athenian history. So there's a couple more plays of Aristophanes also, the Ecclesia Zeusai and the Plutus, that are both later plays, which are actually after Athens, as it turns out, didn't suffer such a severe defeat with Sparta after all. It actually came back into power again pretty well. And by that point, you can see, if you do read those plays, you'll see that that old comedy is giving way now to a newer form of comedy that's now more in style. So this, essentially, Frogs is really the last true old comedy play that we have, and really about at the point when old comedy itself really was beginning to disappear from the scene. And so when you read the other two plays, you can see changes in the way that plays are being produced. Okay, so that's a quick run through of the works. In our the companion video to this one coming right up, we're going to discuss in more detail about what Aristophanes was trying to accomplish with this plays and how that ties in with this general theme of old comedy. Okay, so come on right back to the next video, also on Aristophanes, to continue.